Alright, so here it is. This is called the Universal LionChief Plus remote controller. So let's just open it up here. Got your instruction manual, and there's the remote. So all it is the same exact remote, except obviously it's orange. Same forward, reverse, and you have the different buttons. But this one actually has, if you notice, it's got coupler, rear and front couplers, which you didn't see on any of my remotes. And that's because the LionChief Plus engines have that additional feature for the front and the rear couplers. So because this is supposed to handle both LionChief and LionChief Plus engines, this remote has both of those on it. But in addition to that, it has these three buttons down here for engine selection. So this is really the difference here. It has these three buttons for you to switch between engines. Same on and off switch on the right hand side. So let's get some batteries in the back of this, and then we'll see how we program it. Alright, so the you notice that the bell and the rear coupler and the whistle and the front coupler are on the same button here. So obviously they're in red, and you notice there's the announcement and the shift button in the middle. So obviously this doubles as a shift button. So when you hold that down and you hit one of those buttons, then it's going to do the coupler. If you don't hold the shift, then it'll just do whatever else is on there, which in this case is the whistle or the bell. So that's how that works. Now, you can actually have multiples of these on your layout. So you can have more than one universal remote. So you could control 6 engines with just 2 remotes if you wanted to. But the main thing is it does have a couple of neat features on it. So first thing you got to decide is that you want to pair your locomotive with one of these buttons. Now, you can do it one of two ways. They've done it where you put the engine on the track, and then you basically power it up, and then you're going to press and hold one of the numbered buttons there until it blinks rapidly, and that clears any data that's previously stored under that button. And then when you release it, it'll flash slowly, and then when you put the locomotive on the track and power it up, it'll find the engine and set it to that engine once you hit the button. So if you want to set it to, you know, number 2, you just put it on the track, power it up. This will be blinking slowly. You tap it, and now it's pretty much set. And then that's pretty much it. You're ready to go. And you do that for each of your 3, and then you can switch between them. Or they have another method where you just have 3 locomotives on the layout, you power them up, and then the system will automatically just pick one of the numbers and pair it. So the first one it finds, it does 1, 2, 3. So it's sort of like a random pairing, and then you just select it. And that's the easiest way, and that's the way first. We're going to try that way first, because I don't really care what number each one is set to. And that's the quickest way. You just have all your LionChief engines on the track, and you power them up, and the remote just assigns it automatically to 1, 2, or 3. So that's kind of neat that you don't have to manually do it all. So let's go over to the track. We'll put the engines on, and then we'll see how it works. Alright, so here you can see I have my 3 LionChief. I got the Polar Express right here. Behind it in the back here is the Mystery Machine, and over there is the Hogwarts engine. So we're going to use what they call the wildcard method, which really means all 3 engines are on the track. As soon as I power them up, they're all going to start beeping, and then all I have to do on the universal remote here is press one of these buttons at a time, and it'll sync up with the engines as it finds it, and it'll just be a random wildcard thing as it selects it. But that's the actually easiest way. The other way is that you have to put one engine on at a time and keep the other ones off the track, and then program them one at a time. So this is obviously easier. So I'm just going to power up the track here. Okay, so the track's powered up, and now I'm just going to turn on the remote. Okay, now I'm just going to hit engine button 1, and it blinked and it's found something already. Then I'll do 2, and it found one right there. Then I'll do 3, and that's 3. So I can hear the differences because all 3 of the engines started up. So I know this one actually is the Mystery Machine set because I just heard the diesel sounds go up. But here's how we can test it. We'll listen to the announcements.
Let's solve a mystery. Scooby-Dooby-Doo.
So that's the mystery machine set. So we'll go to number 2 here. That's the Hogwarts set. And number 1. And that's the Polar Express set. So again, you can test it with the whistles too. That's a Polar whistle. That's a Hogwarts. And that's the Mystery Machine diesel set. So now you have all 3 right here programmed into the remote. It really just took the press of each of those buttons, so really simple. You can do it the long way if you want to make one a very specific number for whatever reason, but it doesn't really matter, honestly, just so you know which one is which. So now that you have them programmed, there are a couple of features that vary that you can do with how you're going to switch between the engines, and how, if you have all 3 running, that you control the throttle. So let's do that next. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to assign an engine to one of the buttons manually. So if you wanted a specific number that your engine was set to. So if you remember, the Hogwarts Express was originally set to number 2 when I used the wildcard method. But I would like it to be set to engine number 1 instead. So what you have to do first of all is clear your remote. So the way you do that is make sure there's no power to the track or the engine is off the track, either or. And then what you're going to do is you're going to power on your Universal Remote. And then what you're going to do is you're going to hold down each of these buttons until you see it rapidly flash. Now you want it a rapid flash, so if you just hold it, it's going to sort of flash what looks like it's pretty fast, but it has to be super fast, and it's only going to flash super fast for a second, then it'll go off. So if I hold number 1 down here, you can see sort of on the side, if I hold it, it's flashing what looks like rapid, but then it'll quickly, really fast, and then when I let it go, it'll go off right away. So that's what you want to have happen on each of these. Rapid flash, and then let go, and it should go off. Okay, if you keep holding it, it'll keep flashing again. So just rapid flash, and as soon as it starts rapid flash, let it go. Okay, and then they should all be off. Now it's cleared. Now you turn off your remote. Now what we're going to do is power on the track. Okay, your engine should be beeping basically. If you have an older LionChief Plus engine, it'll just start with the sounds. It won't have the beep, but the newer ones have the beep. Now you're going to turn on your remote. Okay. And now what you want to do is you want to pick the button that you want, and you're just going to, you know, basically hold it for a second until it finds the engine, and you'll hear the steam sound start up. So now the Hogwarts is on number 1 here, and you reassign the channels on it. Okay, so that's how you would assign it manually, and if you want to do your next engine, you basically have to take this one off the track, and then you put your other engine on the track, and then you pick 2 or 3 depending which one you want to assign it to. So again, you got the wildcard method, you just put them all on the track, and then it'll just randomly pick one, or you can manually assign them to the remote, but just don't forget to clear the remote first before you actually assign the engine. And you can assign any button, you don't have to start with number 1. So if I wanted the Hogwarts to be number 3, and that was the only one on the remote, I could do that if I wanted to. So, you know, just depends how you decide to do it. So that's the difference between wildcard programming, manual programming, and also how to clear your remote. Alright, so when you're using the remote to switch between the engines, the second that you change to a different engine, the things as far as the bell, the whistle, and all that stuff, that's immediate. However, the throttle is not. That's the one thing that isn't. And so if you have an engine going, say, backwards, say number 1's going backwards, and then you switch to engine 2, if you want this engine to match what engine 1 is doing, you just hit the button again, and it'll match whatever the current setting on the dial of the remote is. If you don't, then you're just going to move the dial to whatever you want engine 2 to be, So you can either match what the remote is doing so that all 3 engines are using the same exact position for the remote, or you can have it separate where each engine can have their own. So for instance, engine 1 here is the Polar Express. So if I just go in reverse a little bit right here, so let me just have it move in reverse. Okay, so it's going backwards right now. So now if I switch to engine 3, which is the mystery machine right behind it here, you notice it didn't move. But if I hit it again, it'll start going. And it's doing the same exact thing as the Polar Express is. And now if I stop the mystery machine, the Polar Express is still running, but if I switch back to it and I hit it again, the Polar Express just stopped. So basically, if you tap the button again, it'll match whatever your current throttle is. So if you want to stop all engines really quickly, you could just go back to the stop and hit 1, 2, 3. They'd all stop right away. So you have that choice, or you can individually control them. So if I go back to the Polar Express here and I move it forward, and then I go back to the mystery machine, and I just want to do it myself, I can just turn the dial until it basically catches up and does what it's supposed to. So I can have the mystery machine going faster, Polar Express going slower, and I hit Polar Express. Now Polar Express speeds up. And then you just hit the buttons twice if you want them to stop. So it'll take a little practice to, first of all, you have to remember which engine is assigned to which number. But when you're doing the throttle control, if you have multiple engines running at the same time, if you just put it back to stop and you just want to stop everything real quick, you can just double tap the buttons and everything will stop. Or you can control them individually. Alright. Now, the third one here is the Hogwarts over there, so if I go to that one, and I just start that forward, so that's running forward now. If I go to the Polar, I hit double tap it. Now it's moving forward too. And I can speed up the Polar, but the Hogwarts is still going the same speed it was before. So you can see the Hogwarts coming around there. So I can switch to the Hogwarts, and then I could speed that up if I want to a little bit. And I could switch it to the mystery machine and have that go in reverse. So that's coming down the thing now because I have it going in reverse. And if I want to do stop for all these, I can hit stop. So mystery machine stops because that's where it is. I hit double tap for this one, double tap for that one, and they're all stopped. So kind of cool. The remote is really easy to program. Just stick your trains on the track, power them up, and turn it on, and then just tap for each one. It'll find them. And then, of course, the second you switch between any one of these, it automatically has this sounds for it. So that's Polar. That's Hogwarts. That's the mystery machine. But then for throttle control, just remember, if you want to have each one at their own throttle, you just tap the button and then move the throttle for that particular engine. If you want them to all match what the throttle is currently set at, so right now mystery machine is set to stop. If I was running, say, the Polar Express and it's going in reverse, if I did the same thing for the mystery machine, I could just double tap it and it would start in reverse. So, pretty cool. So that is how the Universal Remote works. Now, you can have more than one of these. So if, say you have 6 LionChief or LionChief Plus engines, you can have more than one of these on your layout, and each one can be programmed to a different set of 3 engines. What you cannot do is have the original remote that goes with the engine on at the same time that this is on, so it's one or the other. So obviously these would be turned off if you're using the universal, or you could have 3 engines on the universal and maybe 1 engine that's separate that's not on this as a single remote. So you can have, like, you know, a whole bunch of engines running at the same time and have different people controlling different controllers. And that's pretty much it. The only thing you can't do is you can't have 2 of the same engine on the layout trying to run at the same time. So in other words, you can't have 2 Polar Expresses or 2 Mystery Machines. Okay, so now we're going to do something kind of neat. So this is my Legacy H10 engine, which has Bluetooth in it. Now this will only work if you have a Legacy engine that has Bluetooth module in it, which basically they started Bluetooth in Legacy engines in 2017. Not all the engines, but some of them. And then now in 2018, all new Legacy engines should come with Bluetooth also. So as long as your Legacy engine has Bluetooth, you can actually control it with the universal remote. So if you think about this for a second, you can have pretty much maybe you have a 99% LionChief Plus layout. But there's one particular Legacy engine that you would really like to have, but you don't want to spend $400 on a Legacy you know, remote and everything else in that whole system, because this may be the only Legacy engine you would want. And this one here is a prime example because it is a small engine that would definitely work on a tighter radius layout, and this engine has a whole bunch of features on it like whistle smoke and the swinging bell and everything else. So this would be a perfect engine for somebody that just has LionChief or LionChief Plus, but still would love to see just maybe have one engine that has all these great features on it. And again, this is one of the lowest priced Legacy engines loaded with features that, you know, has ever been released. So this would be a perfect example of why LionChief Plus only type of user would actually want to buy a Legacy engine, but they don't want the whole remote. Well, guess what? You don't need to buy the whole Legacy system. You can actually use the universal remote. Okay, so what's going to happen here is I'm going to assign this H10 to engine number 2 on my remote. Okay, and it's the same process, the manual process I showed you before, which is we're just going to power up the engine, and then we're going to hold the button down until it programs it, and we should hear a whistle. So let's power up the engine right here. Okay, so I got it powered up on the track here. So all I'm going to do is hold down the number 2 button here. And you heard the whistle. So now it's actually programmed to engine number 2 on my universal remote. Now, do you get all the Legacy features of the Legacy remote? Well, obviously the Legacy remote has a ton of features on it, and you're not going to have all these. But you will get pretty much all the basic features you need. So, for instance, the whistle here, if you look on the engine here, you get the whistle and you get the whistle smoke. So you have everything you need there. Let's try the bell here. So this is the swinging bell on this engine. So again, that works because again, it's just the bell, right? So it'll swing as soon as you do the bell. How about the rear coupler? Because we have this rear coupler option on here. So let's go to the back here. And again, to do the rear coupler, because it's in red, you hold down the center announcement button, which is also the shift key. So I'm going to hold that down and hit the R. It opened up. So the rear coupler works. So you have rear coupler, you've got whistle smoke, you've got the ringing bell, okay? And then let's do announcements here.
This is the Yardmaster, clearing the route now. Over. Dispatcher, error is made. Brake test complete. Are we clear to pull? Over. Your route is lined and locked. Have a safe run. Over.
Okay.
Acknowledged. I've got clear boards. Out.
So you got your announcements too. So you have basically all the main features, and then of course if you use the forward and reverse here on the remote, you still got slow speed. Look how slow that is going here, just like a Legacy engine or a Legacy remote. And you see the smokestack is still pouring out smoke at idle. And then stop, okay? So if you're not a fan of the legacy system, it's too complicated for you, and you still want to have a legacy engine, and you want just all the main features of the legacy engine, you can do it on the Universal Remote. So you're not restricted if you want to just have one legacy engine on your LionChief Plus layout. And I think that's pretty cool. So again, as long as your legacy engine is Bluetooth capable, you can actually program it to the Universal Remote and have all the great legacy features, including that really slow speed control and crawl using this remote. Now don't forget, I'm going to show you in a second, but this also will come into the LionChief Bluetooth app for the additional settings like setting the sound levels and doing the momentum and things like that, maximum speed, etc. So that will also work the same way. Okay? So if I put my Polar Express back on the layout here, I can switch between these two engines on the remote and control them. Okay, so I've got my two trains on the track. To the left here is the H10 and over here is the Polar Express. Okay, so I've got my Universal Remote here. So if I do number 2 here, that is the H10. And I can just start moving forward. Whatever speed I want. And then over here is my Polar, so if I hit the first engine button, you can hear the whistle, and if I tap it again, it's going to match the speed to the Polar. You can see it going. Now I'm stopping it because the Polar is going to catch up to the H10 pretty quickly, because even though the speed is being matched on whatever the dial is on the remote, you have to remember that this engine does not have speed control and the Legacy one does. So the Legacy is going much slower than the Polar Express one. So, okay, so sorry I got interrupted there, but as I was saying, basically you can switch between the two, and the only thing you have to keep in mind is because the Legacy have speed control and the LionChief, not the LionChief Plus, but the LionChief do not have speed control. When you're switching between engines, if you do that double tap where it will mimic whatever the dial has on it, you have to be careful, because the LionChief will obviously catch up to the Legacy engine because of the lack of speed control in the LionChief. But besides that, you can switch between the two. Now, I did notice that there is sort of a little bit of a lag when you switch the engines by between the response time to the remote. So you're going to have to play with it. Be careful, because you know, make sure your remote is in range and you are, you know, pointing to the engine that you want to. But you know, when I switched between the engines, it took like a second or two before it would respond to the throttle. So just keep that in mind. But as you can see, if you decide that there is maybe a particular Legacy engine that you would like, and you're not into the whole Legacy system, you don't want to get involved in all that, you don't want to buy the complicated remote and all that stuff, you can actually control any Lionel Legacy engine that has Bluetooth in it with the Universal Remote. So I think that's pretty cool, and again, Lionel's making everything pretty much universal across the board with these types of things with Bluetooth. So just keep that in mind, okay? So now what we're going to do is, now that you know how to program the remote by the two different methods, you know how to clear the remote, you know how to control your engines, whether you have multiple engines, you can control multiple LionChief engines, LionChief Plus engines, or even, as you saw, Legacy engines that have Bluetooth, all controllable with this remote. So now what we're going to do is go to the Bluetooth app and show you a couple of the settings on there and how they transfer back and forth. The other thing before we leave this is I just want you to know one thing, which is an engine can only be controlled by one remote at a time. So you cannot have this remote on and the remote on that goes with the engine at the same time. It's one or the other. So if you turn on this other remote, it's not going to work, okay? Or vice versa. If you had this remote on and then you tried to turn on the Universal, this won't control the engine because the engine's already connected to this remote. So make sure that if you are going to use the universal remote, that any individual remotes that you have are turned off. And the same thing you want to do if you're controlling the Legacy engine is make sure the Legacy remote is also off. Although the Legacy remote is using the Legacy signal where this one is using the Bluetooth signal. Okay. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to show you how to update this remote. There's an app that you download to update it. Make sure you're on the current version of this remote. If you are on the current version, this remote will control all LionChief Plus engines made. So previously this remote could only control certain LionChief engines because of the date that they were made. This remote has both an RF and a Bluetooth transmitter in it, so you have both in this particular remote. Okay, so it will control all the previous versions, models of the LionChief line, plus the new ones, and also the LionChief Plus with Bluetooth, and as you saw, Legacy. So make sure you update it first, because I just bought this remote and it was on its original version, because you don't know how old the stock is in your hobby shop and when they got this remote. And we'll show you how to do that, but Lionel made it super simple. You just download an app, you open it, and it takes it from there. So really simple to actually update this remote once you get your remote, and make sure it's on the latest and greatest software. And one other feature I forgot to mention is if you have a LionChief Plus engine, so not LionChief, but LionChief Plus, you can actually adjust the overall master volume coming out of the engine with the remote. And so the way you do that is, first of all, you make sure that it is in its stop position at the top there. Okay, there's a note in the manual that if you have it in any other position while you try to adjust the volume, you're going to get undesired results, whatever that means. So just make sure that it's in the stop position for the dial. And then what you do is, with the engine on the track and powered up, you're going to hold the shift button down, and then you're just going to turn your dial either left or right. So increase volume, decrease volume, and you'll hear the volume on your engine increase or decrease. Now this does not adjust the individual volumes, but it does adjust the overall master volume for the engine itself. So instead of having to open the Bluetooth app, if you wanted to quickly adjust it, maybe it's just a little too loud, you can just hold down the shift button and then just turn it down a little bit, and that's it, and you've adjusted the volume, and it'll stick because these settings are not in the remote, they're in the engine themselves. So even if you turn this off and then back on, it'll be at the same volume it was before. Now if you want to adjust the individual volumes, that's where we're going to go next to into the app, so you can see where that happens. But that is only for LionChief Plus engines. So on the two LionChief that I have, that would not work. You have to actually go into the app to actually adjust the volumes on those. But if you do have a LionChief Plus, then the shift button and the speed control here will actually adjust your master volume on your engine. Alright, before we get into the actual app itself, let's just look at the Universal Remote Updater. So basically, you can see, you'll download it from the the App Store, and then it'll just be called LionChief Universal Remote Updater. You just tap it, okay? It'll say Universal Remote Over-the-Air Updater, and it'll immediately tell you what to do. So it'll tell you right now, you can see on mine, it says, firmware version 1.2. To proceed, turn off your remote, then press and hold the engine buttons 1, 2, and 3, and then turn on the remote's power switch and release the button. So if you do 1, 2, and 3, you got to hold them all down at the same time, which is not easy, right? And then turn on the power button. You can see it'll say connected to the remote. Buttons 1, 2, and 3 should be lit, which they are. And it says the remote has version 1.2. Press continue to reprogram your remote with the same code. I'm not going to do that because I've already updated it. But what happens here is it'll tell you what to do next, which is it'll tell you to push like button 1, and then it'll tell you what should be blinking, what should not be. And it'll actually walk you through step by step. You don't have to do anything. No downloading of anything, no modules or anything like that. The app just walks you right through it. I did it. It was super simple. It shows you a progress bar as it's downloading to the remote and updating it, and then when it's finished, and that's pretty much it. So you can't get any simpler to updating the Universal Remote anytime an update comes out. And you can just go into the app and see what the current version is. You don't even have to go out to Lionel's website and try to keep track of it. You just come out here, hit the button, open up the app, and then you can see what version. So I'm on version 1.2, which is the latest, so I don't have to do anything. So that's pretty much it. Okay. So you can see right now, button 1 should be lit. Actually, I accidentally hit continue, so it's going to do it anyway. It's going to override it. But you can see right now it says copying new firmware, button 1 should be lit, which it is on the remote. So you can see it down here. It says updating 11, 12. It takes a little bit. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but it takes a little bit to run. So since I already started this, I don't want to interrupt it. So I'm just going to let it run here. We'll come back in a second. Okay, we're back. We're at 96%, 97. It's almost finished. So just wait till the screen comes up and it says copy complete. The remote is now updating. Engine selection 1 and 2 should be lit, which it is. Okay. And then it says update verified. Selection buttons 1, 2, and 3 should be lit, which they are. So it says turn your remote off, then back on to run, and you're done. So I'm going to turn my remote off. Turn it back on. And nothing's lit, and I am done. And that's pretty much it. You're finished. So that's how you update the Universal Remote. You can't get any easier than that. You don't even have to think about it. Walks you through it. And you can just come out to the app at any time you want to and just check for any new updates. Okay, one little side note with the Universal Remote. It does have this neat sleep feature on it where if you leave it on, like I have right here, and it is not connected to any engine for an extended period of time, it will go into sleep mode. And so I timed it, and it's around 8 minutes or so, and it'll go into sleep mode. And so what happens is, if you notice a little LED here is just sort of blinking, it's dimmed and it's just sort of blinking. That means it's in sleep mode, and so it's trying to conserve the battery so that if you accidentally left it on, it doesn't kill the batteries. So to get it out of sleep mode, you can either turn it on and turn it off and back on, which is easiest, or you can just take any button and hold it down and it should come back. So if I hold down like the horn or whistle button here, just hold it, then you notice the LED comes back and it's active again. So just a side note that the Universal Remote does have a sleep mode on it, and it'll try to conserve batteries if you accidentally leave the power switch to the on position. Alright, so let's talk about some of the features in the LionChief app. Alright, so now, as you know, in the LionChief app, you have all the same controls you do on the remote itself. So you've got your speed control, forward, reverse, you've got your, whistle, your bell, the announcements. If you had LionChief Plus engine, you'd have rear and front coupler control. But there's a couple other things in here, and one is the sound. And when you're in the LionChief app, you have the overall sound volume, which you can turn up and down. Okay. Then you have individual sound volumes. You got ones for the whistle. You got the bell. Announcements. And then you got the steam sounds. Right, so you have individual controls for the sound, and then you have your overall master volume, and then of course you have your pitches for your whistle and your bell. So you have these things under the sound. Now, if you are connected with the app and you decide you want to change some of these, so let's just say like for the whistle right here, you can hear how loud that is, right? So let's put it down medium. So it's a lot softer now. And then the announcements.
Now, you're streaming these 10 minutes. Here's your ticket. Stick to it, Harry. That's very important. Stick to your ticket.
And they're kind of loud, so I'm going to put them down to medium also.
This is platform 9 3/4. There's no such thing.
Okay, and then for the steam sounds, I'm going to turn them all the way down to off, so I don't even hear steam sounds. Okay, so now I have those settings set of whatever I want, and I'm going to close the volume. Okay, and I'm actually going to go back to engines here and disconnect this engine, so it's no longer connected to the Bluetooth app. Now I'm going to actually go to my Universal Remote and turn it on. And then once I turn on my Universal Remote, I'm going to pick my engine. And I think it was 3 for Hogwarts. Okay, and if you notice the sound, okay, first of all, there's no steam sounds, right? And if I hit my whistle, it's a lower sound. If I hit my announcements,
You're showing these 10 minutes. There's your ticket. Stick to it, Harry. That's very important. Stick to your ticket.
okay, so the sounds for that are less, and the bell is full volume because I didn't change that. So my point is basically, if you use the Bluetooth app to make your setting changes, all those different settings that you saw inside there, they actually go to the engine. They do not go to the remote, because remember, this remote would be in the off position if you were using the Bluetooth app, because I told you before, only one thing can control these engines at a time. It's either the Universal Remote, the remote that came with the engine, or the Bluetooth app, but you can't have multiples controlling it. So since this would be off, it would make sense that there's no way anything could go into this remote, right? Because it's off. And so there's been a lot of misconception about that for some weird reason. And the settings are saved in the engine. They're not saved in the remotes. So that way, when you power up the engine with anything, whatever you're using, it'll keep the settings that you changed in here. So let me turn off the remote here. Okay. Okay, and then we'll go back to the engine list. We'll get the Hogwarts again, so it showed up. Okay, we're going to connect to it. Now we're connected to the Hogwarts. We're going to go back into our sounds. You can see our sounds are still set the same, right? So I'm going to take that whistle and I'm going to turn it way down. Okay, to off. Okay, I'm going to turn the announce back up.
10 minutes. There's your ticket. Stick to it, Harry. That's very important. Stick to your ticket.
Okay, so steam sounds are off, the whistle is off, the bell is at full volume, and the announcement are at full volume. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to go back to the engine list. I'm going to disconnect it. Okay, and I'll wait till it beeps. So I should hear it beeping. So it started beeping again. Now I'm going to turn on my Universal Remote. This is engine 3 on my remote, so I'm just going to hit 3. Okay, now I'm connected. There's no steam sounds. Now normally I'd hear steam sounds when I hit the 3 button, but because I haven't turned off, there's no steam sounds. Let's do the bell. So that is there, right? Full volume. Let's do the whistle. Nothing, because I turned it all the way down in the Bluetooth app, so there's no whistle, right? And then if I do the announcements, that should be full volume.
You're showing these 10 minutes. There's your ticket. Stick to it, Harry. That's very important. Stick to your ticket.
Okay, so I got full volume on that. Okay, so my point basically is that the settings that you put in the Bluetooth app will stick with the engine itself, not with the remote. Okay, so those are all the volume controls. So now let's check the other settings out. So let me turn off the remote. Okay, you can see that my engine reappeared at the top here, so I'm going to go back into that one. I'm going to connect to it. Okay, now I'm connected to my Hogwarts. I'll go back into sounds and I'll turn all those sounds back up. You can hear the steam came back on, the whistle. You can control your master volume, turn it down a little bit. Okay, whatever you want to do, whichever your preferences are. Same thing with the pitches, it will keep the pitch, whatever you set there. Okay. Okay, so now we know that the sounds stick. So now the only other question is, do these other settings, which are under the little gear here, which are our speed limit, momentum, and smoke settings, do they stick when you set them in the LionChief app and then disconnect and then go back to the controller? And the answer to that is no. So this is the one difference, or the one thing that I wish was different, but this is the way it works. And in case anybody's questioning it, whether you have a LionChief engine or a Legacy engine, if you look in the instructions, it actually does tell you in the instructions under that section for the Bluetooth control and everything that the sounds will stick with the engine. Whatever you set in the app, they will stick, and we just proved that. But these other settings are automatically reset every time you close and then reopen this app. And so obviously if you're disconnecting the engine from this app and going back to the remote, those settings will not stick. So I'm not going to bore you with going through showing you, because I've already tested the whole thing out, and I know for a fact that if I set this down to like a speed limit of 2 here, and I go over and try to run the engine, it will stay at that speed limit when I'm controlling it with the LionChief app. Same thing with momentum and the smoke. If I disconnect the engine from the LionChief, even if I leave this where it is, and I disconnect the engine from the app, and then I go to either the Universal Remote or I go to the remote that came with it, doesn't matter, and I connect it to that remote and then use the throttle, it will take off like a rocket. It will not, the speed limit is not set inside the engine. It's basically set inside this app only, not the engine. So that's the one difference. Same thing with the momentum. Now, there is one little weird thing with the smoke. Okay, so if you are in the app and you're connected to the engine and you turn the smoke off, and then you disconnect the engine from the app, and you actually go back and connect it with the remote, the smoke will actually stay off. So the engine will remember that one piece. And then when you come back into the app, this will actually reset back to on automatically as soon as you reload it into the app. It's kind of weird where you shut down the app, you open the app again, and all these settings go back to the default. So you can see right now I have the smoke off and the speed limit set to 2 notches, right? So if I close this app and then go back into it and then let the engine reconnect, which it did right there, and I go back here, do you see how all the settings have reset? The smoke is back on, the speed limit's at maximum again, the momentum's back, well, I didn't change the momentum, but it would be back to where it was, its default of low. So anytime you close the app and reopen it, these reset right back to where they were, their defaults to be. So even in the app, it doesn't stick. And also I noticed that if you have multiple engines in the app, so if I had multiples controlled here, as I switch between the engines, those settings are the same between the engines as you jump between the engines, so you'd have to reset them. So this section right here, these settings do not stick to anything, and they always reset back every time you open up the app again. And they will not be able to be controlled by the remote. So since they're not going to the engine, obviously they can't be. When you use the remote, those settings are gone. And remember, I told you earlier, these settings for the sound and everything nothing goes to the remote. Everything goes to the engine. And the sounds will remember, the speed limit and momentum will not. And it is actually documented in the section. Now, it's a little sort of asterisk in these sections that kind of show you that, or tell you that these settings will not stick here, but if you actually read it really closely in the instructions, you'll see it. In the Legacy manual, it actually went into a little more detail. It actually had it was more easy to see when I looked up in the Legacy manual. And it talks about the remote and everything like that. So when I was in this manual and I looked up the Bluetooth LionChief section on how to control the Legacy engine with it. It actually does state in here about those particular settings. It even says right here, these settings will reset once you are done running the locomotive and close out of your LionChief app. So these will reset. However, for whatever reason, if you close this and then go use your remote, the smoke will remember its last weird setting. So just remember that, because that's kind of a weird thing that could maybe trip you up and you think your smoke unit is not working, where you accidentally left it turned off in the app. To get it back on, you have to open up the app again, reconnect the engine, and then once you open up the app again, it will default all its settings back to the where it was before. So you got to close the app completely, but once you close the app completely, and that's the key. If you have the app and you left it open, it actually still stays with the smoke setting. But if you close the app, open it up, let the engine connect. Okay, so we're connected, and then go back to the settings. You'll see everything defaults back to on. Okay, so now I'm going to close this, disconnect the engine from the app, close the app. The engine is back to its searching state. I'm going to turn on my remote. I've connected to my engine, and now when I start going either forward or reverse, it should start smoking again, which it is. You can't see it. And I have the chuff sounds turned off, which is why, remember, it remembers those settings, but it's smoking again. So that could be a little bit of a, a thing where somebody could think that their smoke unit wasn't working because they forgot that they left it turned off in the app. And even if you close the app, it's going to stick with the smoke setting, and it won't reset until you reopen the app. And then when you reopen it, it'll reset the smoke back to on. So if your smoke is not working and you were in the app playing with it, all you have to do is open the app again, connect your engine, and then if you had the app completely shut down, it'll automatically reset to on. If you had left your app open and you hadn't actually shut the app or closed the app, then you can just go back to the settings and hit the smoke button again to turn it back on. Either way. But just to let you know that that was probably something that may trip people up if they've been playing with the app and they didn't close the app down. Then the next time you run your engine, you won't have any smoke. So it's kind of a weird setting. So I'm not sure why they're making the smoke part of it stick, but they don't stick with the momentum or the speed control, because that would be the one I would think, if anything, I would think it would be the speed control, which is the one that you'd want to have really stick, if you're trying to make sure that the engine doesn't run off the track or something like that. So unfortunately, for speed limit and momentum, you have to use the app. And it is well documented in the manual, so there is no defect here or bug. That's the way it works. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video on the cool Universal Remote and the fact that you can use it with not only LionChief and LionChief Plus engines, but also legacy engines that have Bluetooth in them, and how to use the app, and then how you can use the different features like the double click of the buttons to set whatever engines you're controlling to the same settings on the speed dial. And also the updating the Universal Remote itself with that very easy app that you should just download from the App Store if you haven't done so already. Again, hope you enjoyed the video, hopefully it was helpful, and I'll see you next time.